Hi, thank you everyone for being here with us at the Imagine This Women's Film Festival. Thank you to Patrice for having us all. She runs this festival and she's an absolute dynamo. I've been lucky enough to have two different films of mine in this festival, and each time it's a joy. She does an incredible job curating a really diverse but cohesive selection of films. And I think that for any of you who've seen the films in this block, this is no different than any other group that I've been with before. Just very quickly about me, like I said, I've had two films in this festival. This festival really supports female filmmakers that come from a diverse background, meaning that you do many things. You may be an actor and a director and a writer and an artist and an activist. And this is like a place of cross-pollination. And I really, really love that about this festival. So my name is Pepper Binkley. Thank you for having me. And let's just go around and introduce ourselves and our films very briefly. I'll say, okay, Leah, how about you start?
Hi, my name's Leah Doze, and I am co-producer, writer, and actor of the short film Tips, and we're based in Canada.
Great. Eileen? And tell me if I'm saying your name right or wrong.
Close, Eileen.
Eileen.
Yes, my name is Eileen Sozin. I was the director, the writer, as well as the videographer and producer for We Save Us.
Great, welcome. Helen?
Hi everyone, I'm the writer, creator, actor and producer of Wasted Seed. Yeah, that's it.
Malka?
Hi, I'm Malka Wallach. I'm the lead producer and actor of Klutz, and we're based in New York.
And Alexandria?
Hi there, I'm Alexandria Cree. I am the director of the documentary short Anya.
Great, fantastic. Thank you all for being here. So I'm going to start out with some sort of general questions, and just take yourself off mute if you feel like you have something to add to the conversation, which I hope that you will. I may prompt you if I think your film specifically speaks to something. The first place I'm going to start is I'd love to hear what it's like if you were wearing more than one hat making your film, as most of you did, and certainly I have in terms of my filmmaking. And when you're making independent films in general, you often wear more than one hat. So how did you juggle those things when it came to prepping and production?
Yeah, how I dealt with that, obviously, because you've got to be mindful of your overall, well-being as you're about to perform in something, as well as produce and write it. I basically, when it came to the shoot weekend, I was very fortunate. I had a fantastic. Oh, can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
I had a fantastic producer and a line producer, which enabled me to then, when it came to the actual shoot and I needed to put my performer hat on, because I knew it wouldn't be feasible to be producer and act in actor mode at the same time. I was able to sort of obviously delegate to them, and then I didn't do anything producery that weekend. So I was producing up until all the pre-production. I was hands-on, but then the actual shoot weekend, to save my sort of sanity, I just handed it over to Lucy and Nico, who are line producer and producer, and that really helped me able to sort of fully launch into the performance and to know that everything was going to be ticking over nicely.
Yeah, that's very wise, and something that I did not do the first time that I made something, and I was sleeping about 3 hours a night. It was not smart. I wanted to say that I forgot to introduce one person. Lucia, is that how we say your name?
Hi, I'm Lucia Valverde. I'm talking to you guys from Spain, but my film, Do You Also Feel a Tingle? Tu aussi cette chatouille, was produced in Luxembourg. Just that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank
Sorry to
you.
miss you the first time around.
No problem.
Does anyone else have something to say about creation, production, wearing many hats?
I think really just to go off of what Helen was saying, it's having a team that you trust and knowing the moments that you can take on multiple things and knowing when you need to sort of conserve your energy for a specific role. There are always, like, I know on our set, there were a couple of producery things that I had to do while I was acting, but on the whole, they only came to me because they had gone through a line of other people first. And it was like, we actually need your final say on this. And so I wasn't like in the disaster. I was in the, okay, we need to solve this disaster, which is a very different than like discovering the disaster, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, just like really, I think having a team you trust is the best thing you can do to let that happen.
Yeah, I think that's certainly when you're doing narrative filmmaking, beginning with a team that you trust and that you can count on when it comes to the shoot is indispensable. I'm curious. I do want to hear from you, Leia, as well. But I'm curious what the documentary filmmakers have to say, because it's a slightly different journey for you. You can see Eileen's off.
Yeah. So for me, I would say it was challenging. My team consisted of 2 people, myself, and the other person was in charge of the sound design, a bit of co-editing and production. But I think what was most important for me was just having an open mind and keeping an open mind and just telling myself that everything is not going to be perfect. Especially like for We Save Us, that documentary, everything happened in a very impromptu manner. So we couldn't really control the variables per se. So just like keeping an open mind and just being ready for that chaos and just going with the flow, really.
Yeah, run and gun.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would love to add to that and just say that I too was part of a documentary, and it was made for a film challenge. So we had a very, short period of time. I think it was 5 days. And I was, my daughter was basically the main actor. She wasn't really acting. She was just being herself. But I would just love to, agree with you there and say for us, it was about being fluid. And I feel that filmmaking is really, more than anything, in a lot of instances, about problem solving. Like, you sort of create this map and then problems arise. And how do we, handle those obstacles? And, one of the things for us was we used 5 years of footage, and my editor was and co-creator was in California. So we were Zooming at night going over, like, does this work? Does this not work? This sounds really bad. And I was, recording voiceover in my car. It's just, you do the best that you can.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, I just lost you guys for a second. You here? Okay. Storm connection, in and out. I think that fluidity is really important, whether you're doing a documentary or a narrative. It's something I think that when you're doing documentary work, you go into knowing, and you don't necessarily think about when you're doing narrative work, when you're going into it. But if you can be fluid when you're doing narrative work, it helps the production so much in every way. I think of it as a little bit like, preparing for a big event. Like, if you're going into your wedding thinking that everything has to be a certain way, you're going to be disappointed. And if you go into this big event, this filming, being very open, then everything's going to be great. And every problem presents a solution as well. And I think that ability to be really flexible helps so much when you're making work.
I can add to that. I completely agree. It's really interesting to hear this perspective of those who've made docs, because that adaptability component is, I learned so much on tips from it, because we shot 13 pages in one night outside. And
you were the writer too, right?
Yeah. So one thing is we rehearsed a lot, which I love to do. as an actor and as a director, and I did not direct Tips, but as a director and a creator, like I love rehearsal, I love workshopping, and I do feel like it takes care of it. It takes care of not so much problem solving ahead of time, but everybody involved becomes kind of primed in the world of the thing. So there's a level of collaboration that helps make problem solving on the day just easier, because just everybody's in their element, everybody's embodied, everybody's like ready to go. But one thing that I really did learn from Tips, and is such a strength of our director, Mercedes Papalia, is that ability to be present with whatever happens on the day, because it's interesting to think, I think we all do this. We imagine what we thought our film would look like, and then there's how our film turns out. And it's interesting to remember, I don't know if you can remember what you thought your film would be like and then what it is, because I think what our film became, I no longer actually can replay what I thought it would be, because it followed the story. We didn't change the script, but it ended up being whatever it was, given all the elements and all the real life things that happened on the day. And I think keeping that level of openness, like Eileen was saying, is so essential, and also really exciting. It becomes really exciting. So
yeah, I agree. I'm going to take it actually in the opposite direction now and ask you what elements you felt were really necessary going into this. And maybe we'll start actually with you, Lucia, because what was one of the things that was so beautiful about your film is that the lettering that comes up at the top is like an introduction. So I don't know if you've all seen her film, but the lettering pops up at the top introducing the film. And then you realize that this is also the handwriting of the young girl, and that this is her journal that continues throughout the film. So I assume that that was a visual element that you were married to ahead of time and planning on using. So I'm interested how, to take this the opposite direction from flexibility, how certain constraints or certain things you knew you wanted to represent guided your process or gave you boundaries, and that how those limitations were met or how they weren't met. And maybe we'll start with you, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's very interesting, because in this case we had to kind of measure the close-ups of the girl, especially when we had those letters that had to be overwritten in post-production. So we had to think a lot about how we were going to shoot those shots before. So, but I think it's a perfect balance of both. I mean, whenever I prepare a shoot, I prepare a lot. Like especially in fiction, you have 6 days of shooting. You was shooting with kids, so like everything is super designed. But then you have to adapt to whatever happens, like you were saying. So I think it's finding that balance between what you need for the story to be told and understood, but then what happens. And in my case, the kids' like improvisations were just amazing, and were adding to the story, to the way they talk. But we had rehearsed a lot already, so they already knew their characters. They were really in character when we were shooting. So yeah, I think that's it for me. It's just what you all guys said before about flexibility and adaptability is essential, but a lot of preparation, I think, is the counterbalance. Otherwise, you just like fall into one or the other. If you're just too strict to what you want, it's not going to happen, because you have to deal with reality. And if you're not well prepared, you might just panic and collapse, which is not good.
Yeah, well, and that balance, I also think is really liberating. And in my films, I've always had a lot of improvisation, and I find that bound of the story, the things that we know we need to get, like you were saying, it gives us like some structure. But then if we're fluid within there, then we actually, those are the best moments. Anything that we tried to capture really specifically with the very little money we had, and the very little time, was a disaster. Like it felt very, stayed. Eileen, did you have some thoughts on that too?
Yeah, I would just say, for me, I was like really focused on sound. How am I going to use sound to save us? Because
It's really evident in your piece too. I mean, it was the first thing I wrote down was how beautifully the layers of sound come in and they echo and they keep coming back. And so I'm really happy to hear that that was something that you went into it thinking about, because it's so evident.
Yeah, because when we finished with everything, when we finished filming and we were in post-production, I felt like we didn't have enough to go off of. Because again, there's that sound variable, and people's mics were going out when they were at demonstrations and there was a speech going on. So I was like, crap, what am I gonna do here? And I really wanted it to play out like poetry. So that's when we really just started to layer different soundscapes and started piecing things together, like from different chants that were going on during marches or demonstrations. And I think that sort of like created the foundation for We Save This, is like that repetition of sound.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how the limitation of the thing, like the reality of sound at a march or in a speech, feels limiting, and you think, what am I going to do with this? And your end result, in some ways, feels like more inside of the experience than anything else that I've ever seen from inside those protests. And listen, there's a lot of footage from inside protests and the movement. And I just felt like you captured so clearly all of those different sounds, all of those different feelings. So yeah, congratulations. I think that it was really successful. And I was really blown away by the layering of those different sound elements and turning it into that really visual poem. And did anyone else have any constraints going in that they knew they had to meet?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that obviously this was only my second short. The first one was a very, very low budget sketch. And so I couldn't always foresee you try and plan the budget as best you can, but I couldn't really foresee what was coming up in terms of location costs, insurance. And so as the production costs started adding up, we had to sit down and say, you know what, we love this restaurant scene. We'd love this scene with her friends at this baby shower, whatever. But it forced us to say, well, yeah, and the scene with all the kids, kids are expensive. So, it forced us to sort of cut it down to the point where you're just focusing on this married couple in the space. And I think in a way, although that was, that wasn't how we set out, that wasn't how the script was going to be, it kind of helped to reinform this feeling of claustrophobia. And certainly when you're living and dealing with infertility for many years, that's how it can feel. And even though we didn't shoot it in the pandemic to start with, the main shoot was before, when you're living that, there is a feeling like you're in a pandemic, just the two of you, because you can become very isolated from the outside world. So that might be a good example of how, we had all these grand plans for other scenes and other people, other characters, but it kind of helped in a way for us to just focus on what was going on between the couple.
Just lost you for a second.
Some of the strongest scenes, because we were both living that experience at the same time as shooting. So we could mine into all of that very raw and very recent emotion. And so yeah. That's how it was for us. But again, my second short, it was the biggest thing I've ever done, produced. So certainly next time I'll have more of an idea of, what we're looking at budget wise for the location and, et cetera, et cetera.
But it's also great that you had that you figured that out ahead of time, and you knew that the story and that the strength of the piece was the emotions and the message, right? The story that you're trying to tell. And maybe that's because you were so connected to your own personal experience and you're the creator. But I think a lot of times people lose track of that and they think, no. The thing that's going to tell this story is the restaurant and the baby shower and the children. Yeah. And I really felt like, your performance anchors the piece. And so you're right to put that at the, to make sure that you don't lose that by trying to do this dance, this production dance. And when we all have all the money in the world, then we can do the production dance. That brings me to a question about message. I think that all of these pieces, and really I feel this way about the festival as an entity, because it's just, like I said before, Patrice really curates beautiful, beautiful work, and powerful work. But I'm interested in art as activism and art as message, like the reason that we make the things that we make, and the pieces that for anyone that's out there that's a budding filmmaker, I think that there can be this pressure to feel like you have to find something that's unusual or find something that people want to pay attention to. But the pieces that really speak to us are the ones that come from your heart and your experience, and when you have a really strong message. So I'm curious what the seed was for each of you. And some of you have already spoken a little bit to this, but what you were hoping people would take away from your piece and why it came into being. I know it's a kind of broad question, so answer it as you see fit.
I can start off.
Right.
So my film is about my daughter who was born with Down syndrome and at 16 months old was diagnosed with cancer. And I was an actor prior to her being born. And so throughout my whole journey, I had a very negative experience with the message that, she was possibly going to be born with Down syndrome. And so I just started writing. And at a certain point, I had envisioned making it into a one-woman show. And then basically the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge presented itself. And I said, hey, well, let's try to do this. And because it was during the pandemic, it was a stay-at-home challenge. And so, many of the things that we dealt with in making this film were probably different than the rest of you, because we got, a prompt, and the prompt was, what does disability mean to you? And so a lot of our process in creation was about that. And the main message really being, that I think it was reiterated so many times that like, life is going to be horrible. Life is going to be scary. She's not going to have any quality of life. Like, all I heard were limitations. And in reality, that's not what I experienced of her life. And so I really, as a bigger, larger idea, wanted to dive into that. And that prompt just gave me the best, it basically opened the whole story up. And then, we were limited to 5 minutes. And just to speak a little bit about constraints, our producer was like, you're never going to be able to tell this whole story. Like, it's too much. You're going through 5 years of, cell phone footage and then footage that I was shooting. And so what we did was we tried to find movement, her walking, her crawling, her in PT, and us on the swing, because that movement, how that pulls in not only the emotion, and the music is a big part, but how we could then show a lot in a little bit of time. So, yeah, thank you.
Well, I think that exactly what you're saying is that when you go into it knowing what you want to capture and then trying to find a way to capture that thing rather than searching for the thing that you want to capture, right? Like, rather than like grasping for the idea. But if you know this is the thing I want to capture, I just got to figure out how to do it. That's a really great starting point, right? And again, the medium may change. It may start as a one-woman show in your mind, and it may turn into a documentary. And I think that that's a natural trajectory for depending on where you are artistically. Yeah, I'd love to hear what other people have to say about their seed.
Yeah, it's so amazing to hear people share about this. It's so personal. You make something, and I think for me, my story started as a monologue that I did as a character piece in an acting class, and it was an assignment. So it's just a one-person monologue, and then I thought, oh, this is just situationally like this yearns to be expanded into a short. So I started to do that, and I think it's really interesting to think about, what is the message I intend to share, and what is the message that actually comes across. And I think as an emerging creator, I think it's really important to hold space for discovering what that is, because I thought it was a story about a server, you know, in its first incarnations, a server complaining about having been reviewed poorly or tipped poorly. And then it really revealed to me in the whole process, like, I mean, the whole thing, filming through editing, it's like, oh, this is what's also going on in my consciousness. And this was pre-pandemic and also pre the death of George Floyd. And as a Black biracial woman, I knew in the film I was commenting on, you know, microaggressions and racial bias and the subtleties of those things and their impact in our daily life and in Canada, because I'm Canadian. And I knew that I was speaking to something that I wrestle with, which is like our access to social media and the internet and the quick ability with which we can comment on our world online, and we feel a kind of bravery maybe in being able to do that in these platforms. But do we really speak our mind? Are we able to confront each other and be honest face to face? Like, what is the difference between the honesty that we have in our digital worlds and then our ability to be honest about those opinions face to face? So I think that I was exploring those things, but I don't think I intended one message to be communicated. I think I learned just as much from it as I hope it, you know, sparks or piques the curiosity of others about as well. But I think that's a very amazing part of filmmaking, is that one must have an intention. Obviously, it's a story, and we're responsible to that story as the creators. But it takes on new meaning over time, and I think that's an interesting experience for me, because Tips, we shot it actually in 2018, but we didn't finish it till 2020, and it's had this life only virtually over the pandemic. So you've never seen it with a live audience, which is interesting. It's a comedy. It'd be nice to see what that reaction is. But because it's sat with me, it's reinvented itself over time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's interesting. And especially I would say that to newer creators is to have something, you know, you want to say, but to leave room for that to shift. You don't need to know all of it, because I think it'll teach you what it is too over time.
Yeah. I think that you know, in your piece, it asks a provocative question about honesty, right? And about what people think is honesty. And like typing something online might seem like honesty, but actually standing up and you know, speaking in front of an audience of people who are standing in front of a line of police, the way that they are in your short, Eileen. What I loved so much in your piece was that you see actually what that bravery looks like, and how it inspires people, and how when people come together and have a message that they begin to understand and talk, like speak aloud together, that a fluency comes from that, right? And I thought that was, anyway, I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about it, but that's an interesting thing for us to think about as creators and audience, because you document what it looks like as this poem comes to life in front of us, because the audience is also creating that thing that you were documenting.
Yes. So I guess first I would say it all kind of transpired from like trying to find or reach self-acceptance within myself. So just like as a person who identifies as a lesbian, who's also Black and Turkish, I've struggled with just like accepting that. And I think through that, I've decided to tell stories that, in a sense, try to rectify racism, classism, transphobia, ableism, displacement, things of that nature. So ultimately, I wanted to tell that story of Black folks and how they felt during that time leading up to the US presidential election results, without really talking about that too much, because I didn't want to overemphasize the election period, because it's so much bigger than that. I didn't want to tell that narrative of, okay, you have pro-Trump people here, and then you have anti-Trump people here. And at the center of that is the conflict that exists between these two groups, but rather, okay, it's police violence, And how do we dismantle that? Well, then we have to address all of these other issues and isms in order to tackle that. And that was really important to me, just to like make sure that I'm representing disenfranchised folks, and hopefully like that when people saw the film, they felt inspired,
Totally.
or a bit of like passion and courage to just like be together and stick together, because that's what it's about, working together collectively and doing things together as a community rather than relying on the government, because it really doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter who's president, right? Because we've had these issues for years and years and years. So that responsibility never truly falls onto one person. While I do believe that one person can, of course, exacerbate those things, we collectively can make that change together bit by bit.
Absolutely. And I think what you said in terms of like making sure that the story that's being told is the story of the people as well, meant that like your piece was really inspiring, right? It's not something that, it's not a disconnected piece of journalism that you're watching somebody tell a story. It felt very much inside of it. And one of the things I kept coming back to and writing to myself when I was watching your short was, there's so much joy here, right? There's dancing, there's singing, there's, again, this like collective creation of poetry, there's resistance. But in all of those things, it felt very powerful. It didn't feel, even though there were some representations or images of disempowerment, it did not feel disempowering. And I think that's a real success. And you could feel that that's where you were coming from as a filmmaker, is like how to make this right from the inside out. And actually for Lucia, Helen, and Malka, Lucia, for your piece, talking about like early empowerment of sexuality for women is so powerful, and not necessarily usually something that people take on with so much sort of like sweet delicacy. Like it didn't feel dangerous. And there's like, these two young girls watching porn, and it doesn't feel dangerous. It feels like exciting. And they're talking to each other and saying like, do you feel that tingle too? And it was just so perfect in that way. I'd love to hear you talk about it too.
Yeah, I totally felt like that aspect of our sexuality was not, I had never seen that, or not like that. And of course, it's based on my own experiences and memories. Like everything you write that is so intimate, generally, not always, but generally comes from your experiences. And it was very important for me to really tell all those aspects of that precise moment when you're starting to feel everything. It's the idealization of love, the reality of love, plus all those hormonal, sexual awakening feelings that are. So yeah, for me, the film is a combination of that moment in your life. That's why it was very important to make it a bit childish, because you're still a kid in a way, and your journal is very, like infantile, but on the other hand, you're experiencing those very intense first tingles and it's unexplicable, and it's super exciting. And well, if you want to hear the personal story behind that, my best friend was there when we shot that scene, and it was, of course, a scene we had lived together. And when we finished because it's a sequence shot, so it was kind of the most important shot of the film in a way. When we finished shooting that, she came up to me crying, like, it's just like I remember it. So
from you guys watching the porn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to share that anecdote.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could feel that. And I think that like, again, honesty, real honesty really serves us, as opposed to sort of this like performative honesty that Leia was talking about that people do online sometimes, right? Like when you're around, when you show vulnerability, it opens up this window into something that, again, I think like has a lot of joy. So if something is vulnerable or dangerous or feels like scary or threatening, actually, when you're vulnerable in that space and you allow people in, there's all of this joy and hope that comes from that place. I felt that also with Malka and Helen in your pieces, which deal essentially with grief. You know, one of them is the grief of losing someone, and the other one is also the grief of losing someone, but someone who's not yet born, right? This expectation that you might have children. And they're different but similar. And it's interesting how for both of your pieces, the lead character is just wrestling with how to come to terms with something that you don't want to come to terms with, right? And you both did that with such vulnerability. I'd love to hear each of you just a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of the way that grief is conveyed really needs to go to like our writer, Elizabeth Narciso, who writes in magical realism, and it allows the experience of grief to be both metaphorical and extraordinarily grounded and real at the same time, which I think gave me gave me as a performer so much room to explore. And while Zoe, the protagonist, is coming to terms with what is grief and how can she move on, and what are the rules for grief, as a performer, you know, there was like a mirrored experience of like, well, what are the rules for portraying grief? How do I honor those who have experienced this while also allowing my own sort of experience and need for how I need to show the story to like come through at the same time? And I also think this is a little bit off topic, but something that Leia said has been sitting with me about allowing the thing to shift and to progress. You know, we shot this in December of 2019. And by the time we were in post, the pandemic had hit. And so our collective experience with grief shifted like instantaneously and immensely in a moment. And so we're sitting there over Zoom, watching, you know, edits come through, not being able to tangibly experience this moment of creation together. And the film just took on such a different meaning for all of us. And I think I often wonder how the cuts would have come through to us had we been editing in a room together, drinking our coffees, having a good time, and if it would have landed with us the same way. And watching it, every time I watch it, it's a new experience. And every time I watch other people watching it, I hope that like what we're giving them is the permission to grieve how they need to in that moment. And that moment, like that could change. You need to cry today. You need to scream tomorrow. Like none of it is wrong and none of it is right. And it's just about who you are and how you process. And I hope that that's what we are giving to people.
Yeah.
I think you make such a good point, Malka, and that really came across in your piece. I loved it. I think everyone does process grief in different ways. And I think for anyone that hasn't been through infertility, it's perhaps easy to sort of be on the outside looking in thinking, well, you know, you haven't lost a parent, you haven't lost a child as such. But I think if you're someone that's lived it for several years and you've had several pregnancy losses, then it definitely is, it's a grief that just builds and builds. It's a cruel grief that sort of builds over the years. And again, as a filmmaker, it's like, well, you're trying to avoid being on the nose with things, but nevertheless, you have to hit it head on. But yeah, I certainly was brainstorming many ways to sort of put across grief. And also when you're going through trauma, you know, for example, the scene where she's on the FaceTime with her friend and her friend is pregnant again, and she hides the fact that she is pregnant from her, but probably because she's trying to protect her, because she's aware that she is grieving. But again, it's, you know, what people do around you because they think, you know, what's best for you. And sometimes, unfortunately, that can do more harm than good, you know, because you feel that people are treating you differently. So Yeah, we could talk for ages on how creative ways to sort of represent grief. I mean, I thought you did it brilliantly, Malka. I mean, the writer and your performance. So I hope that was a helpful addition to what we're talking about.
Oh, absolutely. And again, I think it goes back to that, like, art is activism, right? And about shedding a light on something that with your specific point of view in a way that allows people to get inside of the experience. And hopefully that's what we all do as artists. And by giving people a window into something, they have a better understanding. And then there's some hope for the next time that thing happens, possibly, the friend will behave differently, right?
Yes, exactly. And I think for my piece, it started its life as a short sketch, because that's my background is comedy sketch writing. But I wrote it really, the jumping off point was, when you find elements in yourself and you're on a journey and you're struggling, and you think, I don't like these elements of myself that I'm seeing. So that was kind of the jumping off point. But obviously living it for 7 years, I met so many people that opened up to me, men and women, that shared with me. So, it starts with your truth in a way, but I sort of embellished it with facets of characters I met along the way and people I worked with. And I thought, I love you, but that's kind of bonkers what you're doing. That's really unreasonable what you're asking your husband to do. Shake your legs. Nah, that's too far. But I thought, well, that's got to go in. So it's funny, isn't it?
Well, exactly.
It's tapping into your own truth is sort of a jumping off point, if that's where you want to head with it. But also, collecting little bits and pieces from other people along the way. And certainly I wanted to show from the male point of view that sense of pressure and sense of, what it can do to your identity as well, and your sense of worth, and of course your mental health. But anyway, I'm going off on one there.
No. Well, we only have like a minute and a half left, but thank you. I think, yes, also just to end with that like what it does to your mental health, but also to go into this experience. I think there's so much catharsis in making work that like has the power that all of you have in your pieces. And so I commend you all for putting it out there in that way. I'd love for you each to say like where people can follow you if they want to like look at more of your work. Obviously everyone has the Google, but they might want to know a handle if you have a social media handle, or if you want to share where your other work can be seen. So let's just go around quickly and then we'll say thank you and goodbye. Jump right in.
Okay, so we have an Instagram page, which is at Tips the Film, TIPS the Film, and you can follow us there.
Thank you.
We're on Facebook at Anya Movie, and then we have a website which is anyathefilm.com. And thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
My Instagram handle is at Helen Kennedy Turner 1. The Insta handle for the film is Wasted Seed Short Film. That's the same for Facebook. And on Twitter, we're at Seed Short. Thank you, everyone. It's been lovely.
You can find us on Instagram at Girl Gang Production, or our website, girlgangproduction.com. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I would say my website is luciavalverde.info. There you can find all of my work. My Instagram, Lolita Films, and the Facebook for the short film might be a bit difficult because it's in French. Toi aussi, ça te chatouille. So yeah, there you go. Thank you very much.
It's on the Imagine This page too, so you can look it up.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Eileen, I think we need you too, if you have something.
Yes, so I don't have a professional website. The Instagram, the film also doesn't have a personal IG account either, but I do share stuff about my work and of course the film on my personal Instagram account, which is Renee Reja. R
How do you
E
spell it? Oh yeah, go ahead.
RENAARAGA.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
This is such a pleasure. I love your films. Thank you for sharing them and for coming and speaking and having this discussion today. It's such a joy to hear all of your perspectives and to put faces to the work. Congratulations.
Thank you, Pepper, and
I
thank
hope
you,
you all have a really
Imaginist.
wonderful day.
Thank